Hi there, it's Sarah here from BJC Health, coming to you from Sydney, Australia. Thanks for showing an interest in one of our educational events. You're about to watch part one, so enjoy the event. If you've got any questions about the content, then please consider joining BJC Connect, where you can access all of our facilitators live. Otherwise, please consider leaving a comment and we'll do our best to get back to you.
Alrighty, thank you, Sarah. And yes, I do actually have 3 dogs, 2 Moodles on 1 Roddy, and yeah, they are napping right now, so very jealous, right? But thank you for coming. We've got lifting for longevity today and why your bones need strength training. So we're just going to dive straight into it and try and talk about why it's important to us. Osteoporosis affects over 1 million Australians. With that being said, 2 in 3 women and 1 in 3 men over 50 will have an osteoporotic fracture. So you can see it is really quite a common thing, but doesn't mean that we can't do anything about it. The issue is, once you have had a fracture, your risk does increase for a following fracture. They do say it's double, but obviously it does change based on your balance. And if you happen to be tripping over anything at home or accidentally stubbing a toe, we'll say. In Australia, we do spend about $3.4 billion per year on the treatment of osteoporotic fractures. So that does include in a hospital-based setting. So why does this actually matter? Fractures themselves will reduce someone's mobility, if I can speak tonight, independence and quality of life. With that, we know that the hip fractures, 20 to 25% of them can result in death within 12 months. Now, typically these are seen in the older adults. So most people can bounce back really well from a fracture. But we do know that up to 50% don't regain the exact same function that they have had previously. With that being said, prevention is always the most powerful and possible thing that we should be doing. If you have a look at this graph here, it does show us what bone mass does over the average lifespan. And you can see that it does peak up around the 30 to 32 years of age. Okay, so if we can do so much prior to 30 and 32 years old, then really you're setting yourself up for such a good future. So it's never too early to start. You can see here though, in the females, we do have a greater decline in bone mass, and that's normally in relation to menopause, so the drop in estrogen. You can see the males, they do drop off as well, but the rate of decline is a lot less than that of the female curve there. Okay. Alrighty, I'll hand over to Robyn to just quickly chat about the fracs.
So the fracs calculator, some of you might have heard about this, maybe you haven't, but often when you have a bone mineral density scan, they will try and assess what your risk of fracture is. And we can use specific tools. There's many tools online, and I will put a link to one of the tools in the chat. But you really just sort of tick some boxes, put a little bit of your information, such as your gender, your weight, your height. It will ask you if you have a family history, if you've had a previous fracture, certain medications, and basically once you tick all the boxes, it comes out and it spits out some numbers. And the numbers really are your 10-year probability of fracture. And there's 2 numbers. Usually it gives you a hip fracture percentage and a major osteoporotic percentage. So you can go and do that yourself if you have all the information, and most of it you should have. Otherwise, they generally do this when you have your DEXA scan. And then based on those percentages, your specialist will then decide if your risk is high enough to warrant treatment. So yeah, it's quite an easy little tool that you can do yourself. Now this slide is very similar to the slide that Caitlin showed before, but hopefully you can see it a little bit clearer. We want to understand bone strength, and we're going to talk a little bit more about exactly if we're able to impact bone strength, how we do that potentially with exercise, but just some key terms here. So bone mineral density, or sometimes shortened as BMD, And this is the key measure of bone strength. So often when you do a DEXA scan, it will tell you the mass of your bone, so literally like the weight of it. And that DEXA scan that I was talking about is a type of X-ray machine. So again, if you've got osteoporosis or osteopenia, you might have had this scan before, but simply you lie on a bed and then an arm kind of just goes all the way down, scans from head to toe. It's a very, very low intensity X-ray, and it takes maybe less than 5 minutes to do. And then often you're scanning 2 to 3 different sites. So you might be scanning your hip, the neck of the femur. Sometimes they'll do both, left and right. You might be scanning the lumbar spine, so the lower section of your spine. And then for some people, you get scanned the forearm. Okay, but very low radiation. Another term that you might have heard is the T-score. Now, the T-score really just compares someone's bone mineral density to the average peak bone density of a young individual, and it's often a 30-year-old individual. So don't worry too much about what that really means, but often we will take those scores to then determine where you sit in terms of your bone mineral density, if it's normal, if it's osteopenic and osteoporotic, which you'll see in the next slide. But maybe there's one key thing to note, and I know most of you guys sitting in this talk tonight won't really fit in what I'm about to say, but it's more just good to know, is that as Caitlin said, the peak bone mass is often around that 20 to 30 age mark. And so really from when we're a child to when we're 20 to 30, that's the window of opportunity. That's when we want to try and build up as much bone as possible. I'm sorry, we can't go back in time to do that. But, you know, for your kids, for your grandkids, you want to get them out playing and jumping and doing as much weight bearing, loaded movement and activity as possible, because it just gets so much harder once you pass the 30 to 40s, and obviously then it starts to decline as we get older. It's not impossible, but it's just a lot harder to do. And I suppose the mainstay of treatment now is to slow down progression rather than like build it up, because it's just a lot harder to do. I'll shoot back to you, Caitlin.
Thanks, Robyn. So Robyn has raised obviously some really good points there. The DEXA scan is super important, and it does actually help us with the prescription of exercise as exercise physiologists. Given your score, it obviously is indicative of the bone density and therefore the risk of fracture. So it is looked at and considered before we prescribe exercises. Those of us that might be in the negative 2.5 category or below would be sitting in osteoporosis. And for example, the exercises there just might start that little bit easier and a little bit more gentle. We also have the category of osteopenia, which is between -1 and -2.5. And then we have a normal score, okay, which is -1 or above. These scores generally are retested by the DEXA scan every 2 years, but it is obviously up to the discretion of your endocrinologist or your GP. So there may be a few instances, like when you're changing medication, that you might scan a little bit more frequently. Or if your score is looking really good and you're right on the normal, you might not do it again for another 5 years, which is wonderful. So I guess it's important to look at why bones do change over time. And we have touched on this already a little bit. I think the biggest variable for female population is the hormonal changes that happen with menopause. As I mentioned, we do have this decline in estrogen, and not only does estrogen protect your bone health, it is also protective of other things like your cardiovascular health. But we won't go to that too much today. Similarly, the testosterone decline as well is the equivalent for males, but we did see on that curve there that it is not as significant as the drop in estrogen. Bones also change because we may limit the amount of physical activity we're doing. Like we have been alluding to, exercise being beneficial. The more we do, the more loading we add, the better off the bone. So in reverse, the less we do, the less we load up our bone, therefore not enough stimulus to keep growing more bone, okay? So it is really important to keep up your physical activity, particularly if you have had a fracture. It is great to try to get back to physical activity as soon as you can, obviously to keep improving that bone density and keeping you mobile, as mentioned previously. Another thing that gets touched on a lot is the amount of calcium that we can take up in the diet. Whether we can consume that all with diet or need some supplementation, again, that is up to yourself and your GP and what is the best modality for yourself. In Australia, we have plenty of sun here, which is amazing, but it's actually interesting to hear that the amount of vitamin D absorption that an average human is getting is under the requirement set for bone mineral density. Okay, so please don't get me wrong, that does not mean go and bake out in the sun for hours on end, but it is worth testing via blood test and having that discussion with your GP if needed about supplementation or healthy ways to increase. Another element that does change bone is certain medications, particularly the steroid-based medications. Some of them can have a little bit of an impact, particularly when used for a greater period of time. Okay, so I would say, again, that is up to the discretion of yourself and your GP to talk through the benefits of different medication options that you may have. Okay. Now, this is our bread and butter. Okay, so this is where we get a little bit excited as EPs because exercise is an answer and it is a really good one. But it's funny enough, I say that and people just look at me and like, what are you talking about? How does this work? What do you mean I just have to stamp my feet on the floor? So we're going to go through the mechanism a little bit and essentially a few main principles. Mechanical load stimulates bone formation. When we're exercising, our muscles contract to enable us to move. And that's particularly during resistance exercise training. There is a certain amount of pull that happens from the muscle to the tendon, and that tendon then pulls on our bone. That is a nice positive form of mechanical stress, and it is the stimulus for more bone laying. Yes, words, good. So yeah, it helps us lay down more bone, more foundation, okay? Then we have another concept here where the bone adapts to the load under which it is placed. So regular progressive loading leads to the bones becoming stronger and denser, all right? So if we consider hydrotherapy, for example, where we're removing some of the body weight and the forces associated, we are not providing enough loading to then replace and put in some stronger, denser bone. Okay, so we'll come back to that at a later point in time, but it's important to consider how much load we're putting on ourselves, and it is proportionate to how much benefit we're getting. Now, the mechanical stress in general, the physiological positive stress of loading up the bones does trigger these osteoblasts to come in and keep building the nice foundations. So they're our good bone building cells, and the osteocytes are the ones that sense that little bit of damage and they clean up so that more can be laid down to make it stronger, okay? Again, there's more benefits than that, but they're just the main three that we wanted to go through for us today. It's important that it's not just about the loading, as I've just described, but exercise in general creates so much more stability in the body. It can reduce your risk of falling. So we're doing your balance training, your strength. We're going to build up your confidence and your independence in your activities that you're doing throughout your life. So you're less likely to have those trips and falls, okay? Robyn, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that one?
I wanted to add a fun fact, actually. I'm sure many of you remember quite recently, was it early this year, the end of last year, there were some American astronauts that got stuck in space. I think they were only meant to be out there for a week or something, but they ended up being out there for months and months and months. But there was some interesting data that's been done, not just from their circumstance, but from previous astronauts going out, but 6 months in space. So having the gravity being taken away from our bodies and not having that weight bearing equated to 20 years worth of bone mineral density loss. I just thought that was wild. But it really just shows how much weight bearing is important for our bones. And when you take that away, and I'm not saying anti-gravity is equated to water exercise, but when you take away the load, it does have significant impacts on our bone. I
like that one. That's a good one, Robyn. Well done. Okay, So now that we've talked about how exercise is actually beneficial, we should probably talk about what kind of exercise. That's typically the next question that we get asked. Now, the types of exercise that we focus on as exercise physiologists for bone improvement is resistance training, if you didn't get that hint, impact and loading exercises, and the balance and functional training. So we'll dive into each of those now to give you a bit of a greater understanding. First one here, let me organize this video. There we go. Okay, so resistance training is essentially any activity where we are lifting an external load to the body. You can see here that one of our lovely clients is holding 2 weights and pressing them overhead. That is a nice extra load. Other ways to add load are resistance bands, but it just depends how much load we can tolerate. And we should always be trying to aim high when possible. Resistance training itself will build muscle. Again, remember that muscle pulls on that bone to stimulate more bone density. Some of the exercises we would typically go through are some of the really big, nice compound ones. As EPs, we're thinking bang for buck. We need to do as little movements as possible to get the most benefit that we possibly can. So with that being said, squats, deadlifts, push-ups, and all of those are ones that use so many different muscle groups and are really, really, really important for building that bone strength. To give you an idea, some of our clients here are pressing 5 kilos overhead. They're carrying 12.5 kilos in their hands. And I believe they're deadlifting about 37.5 kilos in this video. But don't worry, we don't have to start there. There's a nice little note there saying we must progress slowly over time. Okay, so some of these ladies in this video have been coming to us for a few years. We can start and ease up. We will discuss that a little bit more later on as well. In general, with resistance training, we also try and aim for the low amount of repetitions, but a high amount of sets so that we can lift the heavy stuff. Okay. Alrighty, Robyn, I'll pass to you.
I'm going to talk a little bit about impact exercise and weight-bearing exercise. So this is different to resistance training. However, you might still use some resistance, and impact exercise uses your own resistance, your own body weight. So I suppose, what is impact training? So really it's just anything that you're putting force against your body. And I really like using Newton's third law. So I'm getting really sciencey here, but if you remember back to your high school science class, physics maybe, Newton's third law is really for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? So basically, if you stomp your foot on the ground is giving you back an equal amount of force that you stomped. If you lightly tap your foot, then the ground's only give you that same light amount of force back. Kind of like if you push the water in one direction, the water's pushing back at you. So we use this principle to be able to mechanically load the bone, as Caitlin mentioned, and not necessarily using resistance training to do that. So this is just a different type of way to load the bone. So remember, resistance training is one way, whereas impact exercise is another way. So this list of exercises on the one side of your screen there, if you can see it, I know it's a little bit small, but this was just pulled from some research, and it's okay if you don't know what any of those things mean, but they're just different types of movements. So I'll pull out some of the more common ones that you might know, so such as walking, and it's saying that walking provides a 1.2 peak vertical ground reaction force, versus marching on the spot, which will give you 1.5, versus running, which would be 2.6. Starts to get a little bit heavier in terms of heel drops. So that's just like dropping your heels on the ground, which I'll show you in another video in a second. Star jumps will give you a little bit more at 4.3. If you were to jump off a 30 centimeter box, that would give you something like 5.2. So it's just showing you that the more intense the impact exercise, you are getting more force going through the bones. Okay, so it's really creating the stress and the strain on the bone tissue that we're looking for. But of course, when we're prescribing these exercises, it's really going to depend on the person, your experience with exercise. Of course, we're not getting everyone jumping off boxes. You know, there is a risk to it, of course, there's safety. So we really need to make sure that the exercise is right for the person. And that's where I'm seeking some specific professional advice is going to help us be able to tailor the right type of impact exercise for you, and if impact exercise is actually warranted for you as well. So the intensity is really important to get the right sort of dosage on your bones, but we have to adjust that for safety. And if I give you some to the next page, there we go. Here's our video. So we've just got a couple of these exercises in action by some, again, of our clients who've been doing group sessions with us. So all of these have been supervised. Here, your heel drops. That's really just intensely dropping heels down to the ground, jumping off some steps. You'll notice in some of these exercises, the ladies might be holding weight as well. So if you were jumping with your body weight, that's great. And then if we can add some extra load, that's just going to allow for extra force to go through the bones.
Beautiful. Okay. Now, with that being said, the third category, balance and functional training. Like we say, we can create really nice, strong muscles and bones. However, there is that freak accident where we might trip on something, and the greater balance we have and reactive strength that we have, the better off. It means we won't get to fall. And then that means hopefully there'll be that no fracture associated. So at the end of the day, the balance is there to help prevent the falls and the fractures, and it can be really nice and simple. I think I've heard many times in clinic now, we're all saying the same things, but imagine brushing your teeth and standing in tandem. That is essentially with your heel in front of your toe. Okay, so really simple. You're adding it into your daily life. When you're waiting for that kettle to boil, you can try stand on one leg. Doing a little bit of Tai Chi is great. If you're not feeling as stable on your feet, even doing simple things like sit to stance are a really good way of building up your functional balance. So again, what we try and promote is incorporating these through your day, because we do tend to need at least 2 minutes of balance training per day to improve overall balance. Now, to sum it all up, this is a lovely bit of research that's been provided from Healthy Bones Australia, and they've come to actually be our guidelines for exercise prescription. It is a little bit small, so I do apologize for that. But in general, you can see there's columns here saying the weight bearing and impact loading, the resistance training, so that's when we're holding some of the weights, and then the balance. If we have a little look, they have actually categorized each column into if you're low risk, moderate risk, or high risk individual, okay? And that's typically relating to the level of bone density that you saw on scan from your DEXA, okay? So that high risk might be further into the osteoporotic ranges, where moderate risk might just be that osteopenia. You can see here that our impact loading days, it's really interesting, 4 to 7 days a week required of 50 jumps or 50 impacts per session. The resistance training, the recommendation is twice a week. They say in general, we need to do 2 to 3 sets of maybe 8 repetitions. And again, we tried to focus on some of those compound ones. I would like us all to try and have a look near the technical guide there in the low risk, moderate, and high risk. Funny enough, they all say the same, lifting 80 to 85% of your 1 RM. Now, no one really knows what that means, and that's okay. It's saying the amount, what you can lift in one go is your maximum repetition that you can lift, okay? We're looking at doing 80% of what you can lift in one go. However, that could be a lot of weight, and we need to obviously start where you're at now and build up to that over time. But it's a nice way to show that we do need to be lifting heavy to get that change in bone mineral density. And then balance down the bottom here. So yeah, 30 minutes of balances, maybe 10 per steps forward if you're doing a tandem walk, for example. So that's your heel to toe walking. At the end of the day, this guideline, like I said, it is all well and good, but make sure it's getting tailored back to yourself and where you are at now. If you don't have that prior history of exercise, definitely go seek some advice and start maybe on that little bit conservative side and slowly build as you feel able or as your practitioner feels that you can. Robyn, do you have anything else to add to this? Are you happy for me to move on?
Yeah, I can add something. I think sometimes when we look at these numbers and it can be quite intense, especially if you've never exercised before. So as Caitlin said, one, it's a build-up, but also when we're reaching some of these heavier weights, which again can be really scary, safety is really important. So a lot of the studies that these research that have been performed on, and a lot of the videos we've shown you have all been done under supervision, because we know that safety aspect, doing the exercises with correct technique and then under that type of load really requires supervision. So when we're getting to that stage of heavier loads, we do recommend doing that under supervision for your safety. But again, it's starting at whatever that person's base is, and that person's base might be body weight. It might not require any weights initially to build up strength, to build up confidence, and that's gradually progress. But that's going to be different for everybody. Everyone's going to start somewhere completely different. And we also, as exercise physiologists, have to keep in mind that you might have other conditions. You might have some other things we've got to take into account. As I said before, jumping might not be for everybody. There's going to be certain exercises that some people can do, some exercises that some people can't do. So I know it can be very tempting to go, well, I can't do that one and I can't do that one, therefore exercise is not for me. We can get very creative, and that we know hundreds of exercises that we can potentially find that's going to suit you and your conditions and your base and foundation. So yeah, just really important to know that there's lots of variables involved, but this is what we sort of work towards and aim to achieve.
So you've just finished watching part one of one of our recent educational events. Hope you enjoyed the content. If you'd like to access part two, then you need to sign up for BJC Connect. It's a free platform where you can access not just the recordings of past events, but also access a whole range of upcoming future events and access our team of facilitators live. All of the details that you need to join BJC Connect are now flashing up on your screen. Otherwise, like our staff, subscribe if you'd like to see more information from BJC Health. Look forward to seeing you in an event soon.